Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into a question that sounds simple, but when you pull on it, the thread unravels our entire modern economy. The question is this: if pretty much every country on Earth is in debt, who on earth did they all borrow the money from? And the numbers? They're just mind-boggling. We're talking about a world swimming, maybe even drowning, in over $315 trillion of debt. Let that sink in for a second. To put that into perspective, that's almost 3 times the size of the entire global economy. Every major government, from the US to China, owes a truly enormous sum. So that leads us right to this massive paradox, right? If everybody owes money, who's holding all the IOUs? Who's the creditor? Now, the answer isn't some secret group of villains in a volcano lair or aliens. No, it's actually much, much closer to home. And when you understand this, you start to see that national debt isn't just some big scary number. It's the literal architecture of our modern world. Okay, so to really get our heads around this, we can't just look at today's spreadsheets and financial news. Nope, we've got to go back, way back. We're talking about a time of kings and cannon fire because that's when this whole idea of national debt was cooked up as a seriously powerful tool for one thing: war. It all kicks off back in 1694. England's fighting a war with France, and they're flat broke, running out of gold. So what do? They come up with this brilliant, kind of crazy idea. The government goes to a bunch of wealthy merchants and says, hey, lend us a huge pile of money. And in return, they promised a permanent stream of interest payments, guaranteed by all the future taxes they would ever collect. This promise, this IOU, could be bought and sold. And just like that, the world's first government bond was born. This was a total game changer. All of a sudden, the power to rule wasn't just about armies. It was about the ability to borrow. Okay, now let's fast forward a few hundred years. That little English invention, it's gone completely global. The system has ballooned to a planetary scale. And here's the kicker. Today, pretty much every single one of us, through our taxes, our savings, our retirement accounts, we're all tangled up in this giant web. We're all acting as both a debtor and a creditor, most of the time without even realizing it. All right, so if we're all a part of this, who's actually holding the other end of the rope? Let's take a look at the biggest debtor on the planet, the United States. We're talking over $38 trillion. And who they owe it to? Well, the answer is probably not who you think. You know, there's this common idea, right, that America's debt is mostly owned by its rivals. But if you actually look at the data, it tells a totally different story. About 2/3 of America's publicly held debt is owed, well, to Americans. Yeah, you heard that right. We're talking about American banks, insurance companies, mutual funds, even the retirement accounts of regular folks. So what about that other third, the part held by foreign countries? Well, yeah, countries like Japan and China are definitely big players. They're major creditors. But you gotta look at the scale of it all. China holds something like $800 billion, and that sounds like a ton of money, and it is, but it's only about 2% of the total US debt. So this whole idea that China could just call in its loans and bankrupt America, it's just not how it works. It's pretty much a fantasy. What this all shows is that the system is basically a giant circle. It works like this. The US Treasury issues bonds to get cash. American pension funds buy those bonds because they're a super safe investment. Then you and I pay our taxes. The government uses that tax money to pay interest on the bonds, and that interest money flows right back into those same American pension funds. It's like looking in a mirror. The creditor is, for the most part, just a reflection of the debtor. And this circular logic, it's not just an American thing. It's happening all over the world. Japan lends to the US. The US lends money to Europe through organizations like the IMF, and then Europe lends to developing nations. It's this massive, tangled web of IOUs where every single promise is basically backed up by another promise. It's like a huge game of musical chairs, and the one rule is you absolutely cannot afford to be the one left standing when the music stops. Okay, so this huge interconnected system leads us to the real secret at the very center of it all. And I'm telling you, the answer to how this whole thing doesn't just collapse, it's completely counterintuitive. All right, here it is, the twist that changes everything. When you or I take out a loan for a car or a house, we're expected to pay back the principal, right? The original amount we borrowed. Well, guess what? Governments don't play by those rules at all. Sovereign debt, national debt, was never actually designed to be paid back. It's designed to be rolled over. That's the key phrase. All it means is that when old debt is due, they just issue new debt to pay it off, forever. So the goal isn't to get that debt down to zero.
Not even close. The real goal is just to keep the interest payments flowing and, most importantly, to keep investors confident. See, as long as everyone believes the government is good for the interest, the game can literally go on forever. So the real currency here isn't gold, it isn't cash, it's confidence.
And this leads to the biggest paradox of all. In fact, if a country like the US somehow managed to pay off all of its debt, it would trigger a global catastrophe. Seriously, US Treasury bonds are considered the safest financial asset on the planet. They are the bedrock of the entire global financial system. If they suddenly disappeared, banks would lose their safest collateral, pension funds would lose their go-to safe investment, and the whole system would probably spiral into economic collapse. So think about this next time you hear a politician going on about balancing the budget or paying down the debt. In a lot of ways, they're selling you a story that can't really come true. The real, unspoken goal isn't to eliminate the debt. It's just to manage it, to keep it sustainable, to keep people wanting to buy it, so that the belief in the system never falters. It's all about keeping the machine humming along, not trying to turn it off. But what happens when that belief, that confidence that holds this whole thing together, starts to crack? What happens when those creditors, who are usually just anonymous lines on a spreadsheet, suddenly show up and say, okay, we want our money back for real? Well, we've seen exactly what happens in places like Greece, Argentina, and Sri Lanka. It all starts with just a flicker of doubt. Investors get spooked, they start panic selling the country's bonds. This forces the government to offer insane interest rates just to get anyone to lend to them, which of course they can't afford. And that's when the big international players like the IMF step in. They offer a rescue, but it comes with a brutal price tag for the people living there. Massive spending cuts, crippling tax hikes, huge unemployment. The abstract debt suddenly becomes very real, very fast. And this is where we get to a really critical point. You know that idea that a country owes the money to itself? That's only half the story. Because the interest payments on all that debt don't get spread around evenly to everyone. No, they flow in one direction, upward. From the general population of taxpayers to the institutions, the banks, the funds, and the wealthy people who actually own the bonds. This makes the whole global debt system a massive engine for transferring wealth. And it's a huge reason why you see global debt and global inequality rising at the same time, hand in hand. Which brings us to the ultimate secret of all this government debt. It's a system built on a promise that was never, ever meant to be kept. The plan was never to pay it back. The plan is to just keep everyone believing that they could pay it back if they really had to. So in the end, the $315 trillion question isn't really who do we owe the money to. The real question, the one that hangs over everything, is this. In a system built entirely on a perpetual promise, a closed loop of trust, what happens if that trust breaks for good?